welcome into this Monday edition of the Advance. Great to be with you. Last week I misspoke and said that we wouldn't be here. So I apologize for.
But we are here.
But we are here.
Yeah, you got me
Brandon
in.
was so excited. He popped out of that chair when the camera went off, and he went dashing past Creighton. He just ran out of the room, so happy and excited about not doing the Advance, and then
No.
Then he found out he had to be here with me again today. So I apologize for the confusion there. Big breaking news coming out of the Metroplex. It looks like the Democrats are dropping their lawsuit against the Tarrant County Commissioner Court District. Now, important to note here, the Commissioner Court districts in Tarrant County had not been touched in 15 years, despite the massive growth in Tarrant County. And that was in large part because the previous county judge, a left-winger who ran as a Democrat, horrible guy, just a nasty person. Anyway, the new county judge, Tim O'Hare, had made it a point, hey, we're going to make the court lines look like Tarrant County, and delivered on that promise. Democrats who benefited from the old system filed a lawsuit, but I guess this morning, Aaron Anderson is reporting that the Democrats have dropped their lawsuit.
They've now dropped that. This redistricting is important to note because we've talked a lot about the congressional redistricting, which is what the Texas legislature undertook during the special session, and that's currently in the Supreme Court. We can talk more about that in a couple of minutes. But this was a separate thing that happened almost at the same time. Actually, Tarrant County redrew these districts a little bit before the congressional maps were taken up, and have done so to create a bigger Republican advantage, right, in Tarrant County, which is considered one of the largest, if not the largest, red county in the state and maybe the country, depending on how you look at it. The Democrats, of course, fought this, and you had, county judge there, Tim O'Hare, and Republican activists there supporting these new maps that went all the way to the Fifth Circuit, who ruled last month, essentially saying that these maps could stay in place. And now it looks like the efforts to fight this map have run out of steam. That map is now for sure going to stay during this upcoming election. And, it's interesting. You've already got some interesting names. Tony Tinderholt, a state representative, a lot of folks who might follow the legislature will know is somebody who's been a more conservative member of the Texas House, running for one of those newly redrawn districts up there in Tarrant County. And so it's an interesting development. Meanwhile, of course, you do have the Supreme Court, which has the Texas congressional maps right now in their court, potentially could rule on that this week. Before the Thanksgiving holiday, you had Justice Alito issuing a temporary stay, saying, okay, Texas can keep the maps in place right now while we essentially sort through all of this. We could see something more permanent come out of the court this week.
And it's, that stay was because, of course, the lower court, the three-judge panel, had said, "Oh no, Texas can't use these maps," and it drew what was, frankly, maybe the most blistering dissent I have seen from a member of the Texas federal judiciary, Judge Smith, just going after this 2-1 decision that essentially ruled in favor of the Democrats. So there's it's going to be interesting to see how the Supreme Court takes us, because that the dissent by Jerry Smith was equal parts just an excoriation of federal judge Jeff Brown, former member of the Texas Supreme Court, and then the other half kind of a disassembling of the just wild arguments put forward by the Democrats that were apparently accepted lock, stock, and barrel by Brown and by the Democrat appointee who was on that court. So it's going to be fascinating to see what happens in that congressional case. It feels unlikely that the Supreme Court is now going to go backwards. That would, as Smith noted, as various people have noted, we're a week out from the filing deadline at this moment, and that would really upset a whole lot of things about the execution of selecting nominees. It's hard to imagine the Supreme, but we know the Supreme Court does weird things all the time.
It's potential that, look, the redistricting that was done back in 2012 was, those primaries were delayed because of this. You look at the differences this time, though, and that is that, frankly, you just look at the Supreme Court, look at the makeup of the Supreme Court right now. Looks unlikely that they would push back against this, which has been pushed not only by, of course, Republicans here in Texas, but also by the federal Department of Justice. The Trump administration has also pushed for this. And so it looks unlikely that will be overturned.
Well,
and
and especially because this redistricting was done because of a Supreme Court decision that said stop using race in drawing lines. And to me, it's just very telling that the Democrats' problem is we're not using race in drawing lines. I thought that we were supposed to be getting away from those things, but I guess only when it benefits the Democrat, doesn't. Anyway, it's very frustrating to see, but hopefully the Supreme Court will make the right ruling on this. Okay, let's talk about this filing deadline.
Yeah.
We mentioned it already. December 8th is the filing deadline for all places on primary ballots.
Yes. So if you're running in a partisan race that's going to be on the November 2026 midterm election ballot, your deadline to file for the Republican or Democrat primaries is going to be a week from today, December 8th at I think 5 or 6 p.m. That's the filing deadline that's been set out. And already we've seen some developments, not just in the Texas legislature. Even
Right.
today, you had Gary Van Dever, who's a Republican who's been there for 6 terms, somebody who most recently gained the opposition of Governor Greg Abbott for being one of just 2 Republicans to vote
One
against.
of 5 members censured by the Republican Party.
To vote against school choice, was censured by the Republican Party of Texas last, I guess, a couple months ago, back in October. He's announced he's not going to be seeking re-election, so that opens up another vacancy there. We've seen a couple others, Stan Lambert, former Speaker Dade Phelan, just to name a few of Republican members who have said they're not going to run again. What's been particularly interesting, Michael, is to look at the amount of vacancies we have now in Congress.
Right.
So take for a moment the fact, set aside these newly drawn Republican-leaning seats, of which there are 5, right? And so each of those races are collecting their own Republican primaries where you have candidates in those races. Just the incumbents that are dropping out has been very interesting to see. I think right now you actually have 6 Republican congressional incumbents in Texas that aren't running for re-election again. You've got some of them that are running for other offices, people like Wesley Hunt, who's running, of course, for U.S. Senate, Chip Roy, who's running for Attorney General. Then you've got some others that have announced, and I'm going to be testing my memory here, but you've got Michael McCall, who's not going to be running again. You've got, Troy Nels, who just announced over literally just over the weekend, saying he's not going to run again. And then you've got a couple. Well, actually, I had them down. I knew I would forget. Oh, Jody Arrington, of course, and Morgan Luttrell. So Jody Arrington, Morgan Luttrell rounding out those 6 Republican incumbents. So you have 6 races there to fill them, plus these 5 Republican-leaning seats. That's at least 11 Republican congressional primaries that are going to matter, that are going to attract a lot of attention, a lot of money, and a lot of interest especially as we hit these filing deadlines here in a week.
And I think for a lot of folks, very practically for the voter, what that means in many cases is you're not looking at just a March primary, but they're going to be looking at a May runoff. A lot of these races, I mean, even in where we are in congressional district, I guess we're 31, where you've got, I think, 8 people now running in the seat against John Carter for re-election. In many cases, that means a runoff, particularly when you're looking at CD 21, which I think has like 900 people running.
That's
in
Chip
that
Roy's
to
seat,
replace Chip Roy. That just means and again, that's why I go back to that Supreme Court ruling that if the Supreme Court jostles that again, that moves the congressional primaries at a minimum. It's just going to makes the whole calendar a little crazy in 2026. Okay, let's talk. We've talked a little bit about this, about the court ruling or the Democrats giving up. About the Supreme Court. We've talked a little bit about the December filing and some of the folks who are backing out. We'll switch gears for a second. A real interesting article is going to be coming up this week. Kind of a legal investigate or legal explanation, best way to say it, coming out later this week by Travis Morgan, is looking at this very strange situation of cities accepting as donations land for parks and kind of municipal uses, green belts, kind of preserve the land and the landscape and everything. And then the cities turn around and essentially give the land away, lease the land for development, whether it's for residential, commercial, industrial kind of development, and some interesting lawsuits moving out of that.
Yes, we've seen that happen more than once too
Yeah.
here in Texas, more than one case there, and so certainly something interesting to be following. I'm looking forward to seeing that report from Travis as well. And I think it's worth noting that we've got I would say, a really interesting Real Texans episode as well coming up in this next week.
Yeah, this week's Real Texans interview is going to be, I think, really fascinating for folks. I sat down with Tony Busby, one of those just very fascinating attorneys. Just really a very interesting guy, generally speaking. He has some very direct words for Governor Greg Abbott. We talk about higher ed. We talk about just kind of his legal profession. Very fascinating. I actually went to his office to do this interview. We didn't use our studio here in Leander. Instead, we were there in his office in Houston. And from his office, he looks down on the building where he had his first job as a lawyer.
Wow.
So kind of poetic there for Tony Busby. But I think a very interesting guy who certainly has not been shy about taking on some very high profile cases. Going against some very entrenched interests, and he's kind of at a point in his career where he's able to pick and choose some of these cases. So again, a very interesting guy. So that'll be coming out on Sunday.
Looking forward to seeing that.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. So, all right. Well, thanks for spending time with us here on this Monday. It's chilly here. I know Brandon loves the cold weather.
I do.
I despise it with a passion. But one way or another, we will see you next Monday here on The Advance. Thank you.